Welcome to the Grandpa Channel, where stories don't fade, they get recorded. I'm Steve Harris. My grandkids call me Rivers. This podcast is where grandpas and grandchildren pull up a chair, turn on a mic, and let her rip. Grandpa stories are chock full of wisdom, life lessons, and frankly, funny as hell. Your stories are the magic elixir to help your grandkids navigate Mr. Toad's wild ride, aka life. Let's Grandpa. This episode of the Grandpa Channel is brought to you by Harris Big H, home of wonderful hamburgers, French fries, onion rings, the magical and medicinal, so I say, root beer freeze. Head to Hires and treat yourself like the legend that you are. Now back to the channel. This is Rivers, aka Steve, and I have an incredible guest here on the Grandpa Channel. This is my wonderful friend Brent Dial, and Brent has been a neighbor for over 30 years, and he's in the Harris Family Hall of Fame, a unanimous choice, I might add. And so whenever his name is spoken, it is with deep reverence. I just want you to know that. So anyway, I wanted just to kind of explore. Tell us how many grandkids you have.
Joan and I have 17 grandkids.
Well,
yeah.
Take your breath away.
Oh,
yeah.
It's a constant fun experience.
So what's the age range on the kids?
They go from 28 down to 3 months.
And this is kind of a loaded question. They might even call it a leading question, but do you find grandparenting challenging at times, or is it always just lollipops and rainbows?
It's challenging at times because you care about these grandkids just like you care about your own kids. They're our family. And so we struggle. Are we doing things right? Are we making mistakes? Do they feel like we really love them? So yes, it's a constant concern, and we lie awake at night sometimes struggling with answers.
Now, you mentioned before, just before we went on, what your interactions were with them.
That was a long time ago, but I'll tell you about my mother's father. His name was Jesse Jensen, and they lived in a little town in Gridley, California. So I didn't get to see him much because we lived in Salt Lake. But when we did see him, it was interesting. He was a dog catcher and worked for animal control. Mm-hmm. And he loved animals. He really did. And so every time we went out to see him and visit with him, it was interesting because he would always give us a gift to take home with us, a stray little puppy. And my mom did not appreciate that, but we learned from him also how to love and take care of animals, especially stray animals that needed a home. So I learned that from him. Also, he was kind of a farmer. He raised some pecans and walnuts, and so he was busy cracking those walnuts and pecans and giving them to neighbors and friends because he was very service-oriented.
Interesting. Now, your other grandpa?
My other grandpa, his name was Samuel. Sam, we called him, Sam Dial. And he was an interesting man, a large man. He had 5 sons, which my father, Dennis, was one of them, and 5 daughters. He worked for Kennecott Copper, and I really remember something that he was very good at. He would make hunting knives in the shop out at Kennecott, and these hunting knives were just beautiful. And I was young, and I remember taking them out of a scabbard and feeling how sharp they were and how they left so beautifully. And I remember when I got old enough to deer hunt that I was given one of those knives, and I thought I was so cool. But he was a hard worker. He loved to play games with my dad and his brothers, especially pinochle. And boy, they got in some arguments on that game. But he was a wonderful man. I remember when my grandma, Elja, died, that my grandpa came to live with our family. And that was an interesting experience because he was kind of gruff, but he was a wonderful man. And my mom would take care to play checkers with him every day. He loved to play games. So she was a good checker player, and he was too. And so They were competitive and had some good games, but then I remember he'd always let me come in and play a game. And then one other experience or two that I remember about my grandpa's. When I was first born out in Granger, 5 or 6, we used to go down to his home. He had a big gray home he boarded some other individuals. And I remember we played on his property a lot. And I remember on warm, sunny days, but in between the sidewalk slabs, they had black tar. That's how they kind of softened the leveled up the sidewalks. I'd pick out some of that black tar and chew it like it was black.
That explains some of the
problems.
But go on.
I know. I got to talk to him.
Wow, chewing tar.
But it was actually, why do I remember that? I don't know. But I remember that about his place down there by the Jordan River in Granger. And then when he lived with us, we would catch him crying some days, and I asked my mom, what's going on with Grandpa? He used to watch, I think it was General Hospital, and he got so involved in that drama that he would end up crying some days. And my mom said, just leave him alone for a while. He'll get over it.
Did he get more sentimental as time went by?
I think he just missed his life, but he was a great man too.
So you had these two grandfathers, and then tell me about your dad. I've met him a couple of times, and by all accounts, just an incredible person. And then I'd like you to talk about how your dad, what were some of his characteristics as a grandpa to your kids?
You know, I was so lucky to have my mother and father as parents. I really can't tell you how great a man my dad was. He understood the importance of prioritizing what was important. He was a bishop twice, so busy as a bishop. He had a job that he was very busy, didn't make a lot of money, but always spent time with his family, loving them, and he was there teaching us how to be kind and patient. I remember several experiences that he taught me the importance of service and loving his wife. I never heard him yell at my mother. Now, I don't think many people can say that nowadays, but that's a true statement. He treated my mother as a queen. And
in the best way.
Oh, and that is a great lesson for all of us, how to treat our wives. He loved the Lord, he taught us the importance there, and then he taught us the importance of service. I remember as a young boy, we lived up by Highland High School. It snowed in the winter, more then than I think it does now. He would get me out of bed early in the morning, and we would always go and do 2 or 3 neighbors' walks before we do our own. And I'd always say, Dad, let's finish ours first and then go do theirs in case we're too tired. But he was very kind. He'd go out and we'd shovel 2 or 3 neighbors, then we'd come back and finish ours. I always felt warm inside after I'd done that. And he taught me and he taught my kids the importance of hard work. And whatever you do, like there's a saying, do whatever thou art, do well thy part. He taught us the importance of no matter what you're doing, to work hard, to do a good job at it, to finish the project, to not leave loose ends. That was a good training experience for me and my family. He loved to serve others. I remember one time, I just can't tell you how much I love my dad. We were on a trip, my uncle, my dad and I, just to go fishing up at the Strawberry Reservoir, where a lot of people go fishing. And I remember we left late that night, and it was raining, and oh boy, the roads were miserable. Well, we got on this dirt road to go back into the area where we were going to fish. We rounded a corner, and before we knew it, we were up to just the running boards in this 2-wheel drive truck we had in a mud hole, and we were stuck. It was just no use, especially it was so dark. So we went to bed right there in the back of the truck and got up early in the morning and started jacking up the truck, and we found just some spare pieces of wood planks and put under the wheels. We were inching our way forward, but we weren't getting anywhere. And I looked out in the distance, and I'll never forget this. I saw a truck coming around the corner, and I was so happy. I looked at that truck, and it was a four-wheel drive truck. And back 60 years ago, there weren't as many four-wheel drive trucks as there are now. And especially, it had a winch on the front. And those were unheard of at that time. So my dad and I went over and talked to this guy. I'll never forget, the truck on the side of it, it said Current Creek Lodge. And I said, can you help us out for just a minute? We've been stuck here all night. And he said, sure. And so we went back to the truck, and he pulled out in front of us. And then he kept going. He never stopped to help us get out of that. It would have taken him 10 minutes to hook that winch up to my dad's truck and pull us out. But my dad said, hey, hold it, because I was really mad. I couldn't believe it. Because when you're out in the mountains, you always help one another.
Code of the West.
No, it's code of the West. That's a good way to say it, Steve. Yeah. But we worked at it for another couple hours, and finally we got out. And we drove our truck to the end of the road, and there that yellow Ford truck with the winch on, four-wheel drive, was sitting there. And the guy was out fishing somewhere. But my uncle was so upset, he wanted to go and kick the side of the doors in, and I said, no, and I said, let's just let the air out of all his tires, you know. And then my dad said, son, you'll remember this experience all your life. It'll teach you so much.
Get it through.
I was 15, you know.
Full of snark.
Oh, yeah. I was really upset, and my uncle was too, because he was quite a bit younger than my dad. But we remembered that situation, and we always, from then on, took the opportunity to go out of our way to help other people that were in difficult situations.
Well, your dad was a visionary, man. I mean, to me, that's, grandpa's as visionaries is a pretty incredible thing. To see into the future. Yeah, to tell me, and I still remember, you'll remember this situation. You'll remember it in your life. And I couldn't even understand it when he was telling me then, but I sure have over the years. And then he taught me the importance of service, and then he taught me another situation that was meaningful in my life. He taught me how to be patient and kind. We did a lot of hunting and fishing in our lives because back then we didn't have the money to vacation. And 60 years ago, most people did hunting and fishing and camping much more than they do right now, Steve. But we were coming back from deer hunting, and it was just my dad and I in his red Ford truck, and it was a two-door. They didn't have four-door trucks back then, or it was just two-wheel drive, but we were coming out of the canyon there by Heber, and they used to have a deer checking station right there on the outskirts of Heber. And my dad pulled over about 300 yards from the deer checking station. He said, son, check the two rifles. They were hanging in the back window right there off a gun rack, and he said, make sure there's no shells in the chamber there. And so I said, sure, Dad. So I reached up with his gun and just uncocked it and put my finger in there, and I said, yeah, there's no shell there. But I took my gun down and I uncocked it and put my finger up there and said, yeah, there's no shell there, and I took it down. And then when you recock it, I pointed it out the window and just pulled the trigger because I knew nothing would happen. But there was still a cartridge in the chamber. And we're in this two-door truck, and you can understand the compression of a high-powered rifle going off and going through the windshield 200 or 300 yards from the Fish and Game right there. And it blew a hole in the windshield, and I wanted to leave this world right then. I really did. I've never felt so ashamed because my dad had always taught me the importance of being safe around rifles, high-powered rifles, and I was. Had a momentary lapse.
I didn't take the chance to really do it the right way, but my dad was very quiet, and he just drove into the Fish and Game station, and they had heard the rifle go off, and my dad rolled down the window, and the Fish and Game officer said, is everything okay? But they could see the windshield, and they could see me sitting over there, just really
distraught.
And distraught is a good word. And my dad said, no, we've got everything handled. It's okay. And then we drove home. And my dad was so patient and kind, didn't come unglued. There his windshield was blown out of his truck. And here I am, just feeling terrible. But my dad taught me love, patience, and kindness. I'll never forget that experience. And I just had lots of experiences with a kind father that would do anything for his family and for his grandkids. Wow. He was the same with all his grandkids. He taught us well. He taught us how to not to hold grudges and to serve others, and the importance of loving his wife and loving the Lord.
One thing that strikes me is, and I don't know the answer to this question, but let me ask you the question. Have you shared these stories both with your kids and with your grandkids?
I've shared these stories with most of them, but I need to write them.
Yeah. Well, and I think the actual sharing of the story, like listening to you, and I mean, I have a picture of Brent's dad in my mind. These are stories that are so impactful. And I think that my theory, Brent, is that all of us grandpas, we in our 60s and 70s, or however old we are, we have all of these fantastic experiences. Some are funny, some are sad, some are just like, are you kidding me? I can't believe my dad didn't blow his top, sort of a thing. But I think that we're just jam-packed with these stories that need to be told. If you get a chance to, you could write them down. One of the things that I'd like to encourage grandpas to do is to use their phones and use, just like we've got it set up here, and just say, let me tell you a story. And then it's just an idea. When I was thinking about that, I just thought, man, those are stories you gotta tell your grandkids, and I guarantee you that they'll remember stuff like that, I think.
I hope so, because they were so impactful to me. They've meant a lot to me. That's interesting, because it was just a Mother's Day dinner, and they were saying, it's your turn next on writing your history down, and they said you can do it just by a phone, and you can edit that off the phone. And
lots of
I
work.
said, well, that's what I need, with a whole lot of editing.
And I think that if we really knew what the impact of these stories were, it would remove a lot of obstacles. Time's an obstacle, technology's an obstacle, and sometimes my daughter's been teaching me the concept of messy action, where you say, well, I've got to have this in place, that in place, and this in place before I can do it. And I just decided that I just needed to move forward. And so about a period of about 3 or 4 months, I did close to 100 little stories on my phone. And let's say that the production value was, terrible, but it really kind of opened up my mind to all of these great stories. Okay, so let's change this a little bit. Okay. Let me ask you the question. How did your dad grandparent with your kids? And how did he great-grandparent with, your grandkids?
Well, he did the same thing with my grandkids that he did with me. That's hopefully what I'm doing. He took them hunting and fishing, and they saw what kind of a man he was as far as servicing, caring about other people. I think that's the greatest lessons. He worked with them. He saw, my grandkids saw my dad come into our house and run gas lines into our freestanding fireplace. He'd be on his hands and knees, and he was 75, and they saw him working hard, finishing a job, and loving doing it.
He wasn't like, your dad and mom asked me to do this and crap, I could be doing 101 different things.
He was present with them, and he taught me and my wife that when you're serving other people, you get great joy from that. And that's an important message that we all need to expand on.
And by the way, that's the reason why Brent is a charter member of the Harris Family Hall of Fame, is through his acts of service as a neighbor and as religious capacities, and I think service, that really, when I think about you, if I had to say one word, service would be one of the things that would pop into my mind. And it isn't like, oh yeah, he has a great handicap. I just think that that's who you are. So tell me, I mentioned to you that, ask you this question just a little bit before. Are there areas in which you feel like you could up-level your grandparent game?
You're hardest on yourself, that's for sure. Sometimes I feel like I could be more in the present with my kids. I miss some of their activities, but I can't be at everything because they're in tennis, they're in lacrosse, they're in baseball, they're in pickleball, they're in tennis, they're graduating, they're in plays.
Dancing.
Dancing, that's all that. I just could do a little bit better there. That's important. And I've had a little problem with my patience with two of my grandkids.
Who will remain nameless, right?
Well, yeah, there are two of them that they seem to quarrel, backbite, and complain with each other. And so sometimes I lose my patience with them. Mm-hmm. And I need to be better. You need to discipline through love, and sometimes those are the farthest words from my mind. Yeah. They really are. But I could do better there. Another thing I've found that the older I get, I like to buy them things. Maybe I bought my grandson a hunting rifle when he gets old enough to hunt, and I bought one of my grandsons, a couple of them, fishing poles, and then clothing and things like that. And then I said, well, why did I buy those things? I should have taken them hunting. I should have taken them fishing. I should have done these things instead of just thinking, well, if you buy them the gifts, that's what they'll remember. Being there is more important than paying for gifts. And so I could do better there, but I'm trying, but I know that they know I love them no matter what.
That's the sense that I have, and I've watched. You just lived down the street a few houses from us, and I've seen you in action sometimes without you knowing that I'm watching you.
Uh-oh.
And sometimes we have good moments and sometimes not so good moments. The nice thing is I think grandkids and children are, to a large degree, they're fairly forgiving. If you exhibit and ask for forgiveness, and if they see that you're trying harder, that's been my experience. I hope so too. What kind of advice would you have, Brent, for, well, let's look at it this way. You've got Dusty, who's got a 17-year-old, and then Brandon, how old is their oldest?
28, and he lives in a basement.
Oh, man.
In that apartment in the basement.
What advice would you have as a grandparent for your kids who are kind of entering into that, the grandparenting sort of thing? Maybe not right now, but a few years.
You know what's interesting? I'll say something first that has been incredible for my wife and I. We built our home and then made sure that there was a kitchen downstairs and a whole separate entry so that if any of my kids ever needed a place to stay, they would have the opportunity to stay in our basement, self-sufficient, with a laundry room, a kitchen, bathrooms, bedrooms. And I got to tell you, Steve, that has been such a great experience because every one of my kids and their families have lived in that basement.
We can say the same thing.
And you know what?
Yeah.
I have loved every minute of it.
I have too.
And I have learned to know my grandkids better because they were downstairs, and sometimes the mothers would send them upstairs, even though I didn't want them to maybe, but we'd go outside and cut the grass together, or I'd cut the grass and they'd watch. But I thought that was such a fabulous experience. So I would say, if you have the opportunity, make sure that maybe you have an outside entrance into your house. And because in the world that we live in nowadays, you never know what's going to happen.
You never know what's going to happen.
And that has been great for our family. I've learned so much about my grandkids.
And we've had the same experience of just seeing grandkids in action at younger ages, and there's a lot of laughter that goes on in our home. I think there's just lots to laugh about. It's been a blessing.
A real blessing. I hear other people say, I would never do that. Are you crazy?
Sounds like purgatory.
I would never have an outside entrance. No way.
Well, I think in some ways we have this. My dad was a fabulous father, just like your dad was a fabulous father. And he had different ways of doing things. He wasn't a hunter and a fisherman, but he loved to go up to Utah football games, University of Utah basketball and football games. That's how we became close. There's more than one road to Rome, as they say, but in some ways, I almost feel guilty, I don't know if you do, that I had such a wonderful role model. And I really admire people who did not have a good role model as a dad or as a grandfather, and then they managed to be kind of a bridge builder, do a 180 and be completely different. My father, for instance, his dad was an alcoholic, and he came from a very chaotic home, and he managed to be the exact opposite of what his dad was like. I'm just so grateful, and I feel like I have this incredibly high bar that I've got to somehow get up and over. But what a wonderful thing to serve as, an example for kids and grandkids.
I feel the same way, Steve. It's my dad's first name was Dennis. He named me Dennis Brent. But I've had such a difficult time not using just Brent as my name because I never felt as good as my dad. He was so wonderful. I'm just now starting to use Dennis again. Yeah. And I'm so proud of my dad on what he taught me and how he loved me.
He was a lovely, wonderful person.
So I pay honor to him and my mom. If I turn out to be a good grandpa and a good husband...
But I do think that there are situations, and you're probably aware of them too, where there hasn't been that example, and yet somebody really does a 180. Man, I tip my hat.
Just like how do they do it?
But, I feel like I have these high expectation things with my dad, and I feel that you feel the same way too.
I feel exactly the same.
If it makes you feel any better, I think you're absolutely following in the footsteps of your dad. And I am so grateful that you come on and talk and have been such a wonderful neighbor and friend. We've actually been here 33 years.
33 years.
Yeah, a long time.
And you've been a wonderful neighbor.
I was waiting for you to say that. But.
Until you asked me to do this, I love your family. I love
Just thanks for coming on and talking about this.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
That's it for today's episode of the Grandpa Channel. Leave a review, share it with a friend, or better yet, tell your favorite grandpa. We're on a mission to gather 1 million grandpas, storytellers, wisdom keepers, and lovable wild cards. Until next time, keep the mic hot, the memories fresh, and the jokes just slightly inappropriate. I'm out of here.